First, we'll want to start by cutting one onion. This is for the beans. We have cut up the onion. We will now saute 6 slices of bacon in the Instant Pot. We'll wait a moment for this to warm up, and then we'll add the bacon. This is heating. I want to prep a plate with paper towels so you can get ready for the bacon. And this seems warm enough, and so this doesn't have to be anything pretty since we're going to be cutting the bacon anyway. I want to separate these. While the bacon is frying, we can put in a plastic bag, refrigerate them. While the bacon is cooking, you'll also want to prep a small pot of water. Let me get this out. Once the bacon has reached a decent level of doneness, it doesn't have to be anything special since we are going to be adding this later to cook. But transfer these over. And we will want to soak up some of the grease with a paper towel. Once this is done, have these dry. Notice that these aren't fully done, but they don't have to be fully done quite yet. And now we will add the onion. If anything gets on the outside, you can just put that back in here. Stir this around. In the meantime, while you prep the onions, I'm going to start to rip up the bacon into smaller pieces. Like this. and you'll want to occasionally stir the onions. This may be easier to do if you have a second person and they are willing to rip up the bacon. Notice, do not outsource that job to someone who will eat the bacon as they rip it. And we'll want to stir the bacon a bit more. At this point, your hands will be greasy, so you'll want to wash your hands and then swap out a new utensil. Rest this here, and then we'll move on to the borscht part, for the time being at least. So we'll want to separate the beet from the beet greens. So at this point, you'll want to have this bit here, and then we'll scrub the beets. And add them to the boiling water. Let's get back to the onions. At this point, I want to add some garlic. Okay. Stir this around. At this point, you can probably turn off the saute part. And then 2 bay leaves. And some salt. And at this point, we'll want to drain the beans. This may be slightly difficult if you don't have a strainer. Also note that the beets will be cooking for 30 minutes total. Side note about the beans, they will be needed to soak for at least several hours in mostly water, but also a little bit of vinegar. I use red wine vinegar. You can use like apple cider vinegar, or probably even white vinegar. Although we will need to use red wine vinegar for the borscht rather than apple cider vinegar, so if you want to invest for both recipes, get the apple cider and get the red wine vinegar. And at this point, we'll add the bacon in. And stir a bit. And now we start cupping in water. If you want, you can use beef broth, but I will be reserving that for our other recipes. The amount of water that you'll need will vary. It's usually around 3 cups. Stir this in a bit. Then put on the lid. We start manual for an hour. Note that this will take time for it to pressurize, so this will take longer than an hour to cook. Notice that you'll probably want to turn down the heat a bit on the beets once you add them in. Move on to the borscht. So we'll want to chop a quarter of this cabbage. We'll want to wash the outside first, and then a quarter of a head we can begin chopping. Also, I neglected to mention that we'll need celery. You may find it helpful to put it and to put the cabbage in a bowl. And now we will chop approximately this volume of carrots, then a very small amount of celery. You can begin to cut another onion. And once you've cut up the onion, move on to the beets. Now that they have been boiled, we'll want to move on to a different cutting board after this so we don't get the beet juice everywhere. At this point, we want to salt the tops of the pork. Let it rest for about half an hour. In the meantime, we will brine the chicken. What this consists of is salting the chicken heavily. Mixing around a little bit, that the salt isn't just on one side. Then adding hot water. Enough to cover the chicken. In the meantime, we will prep the vegetables for the beef. So first we'll need half a bunch of asparagus. It's like this much. Once you have washed your knife from the beets, you can now chop the asparagus. Once we've cut that up, move on to the peppers. I want about half of these. Once you've cut those, you can move on to your final 2 onions. Also note that these are in the same plate because they're going to be added at the same time. You have chopped the onions. You can now move on to the borscht, the actual cooking of it. Now we preheat the pan. Notice that the pan comes with a lid. And we'll now add grapeseed oil. Notice that I'm not using olive oil because olive oil has a fairly low smoke point, which makes it excellent as a garnish, but not great as a frying oil, whereas grapeseed oil has a fairly high smoke point, which makes it ideal for frying. This was perhaps a bit too much, but it should do the job. I want to let that heat up for like 5 minutes before we add in the onion. In the meantime, we'll want to preheat our oven for 400 degrees. Just make sure we have nothing in the oven yet. Now this we'll want to line a baking tray with tinfoil. Now we want to drain the chicken . This you'll ideally need both hands for. So I'll set this down. Now you want to pat the chicken dry with a paper towel. And place the chicken on the baking tray. Once you've finished with that, it's now time to want to have a spatula ready. To cook and to fry the onions for the borscht. Well, onion, the simpler onion. We will want to put some sesame seed oil onto a paper towel and then pat the chicken with it, and on both sides, so flip after each one. You might want to add some oil to the paper towel as well. Of course, you can't let you get distracted from the onions. A little bit of brown is fine, but you will generally want to avoid overcooking the onions. And now these look about time for these to be put in. While these are cooking, I want to salt and pepper the chicken. It's okay if you don't get to the peppering step, because as you can see, the oven is still preheating, and it's going to be some time before we put it in. Let's cook this for like 5 minutes, or less. At this point, we can add the cabbage and the garlic powder. Some stray pieces of cabbage here. Want to stir in the cabbage before adding in the garlic. We'll want to do so. We'll want to add them fairly close to each other. And remember, you can be generous with the garlic, but there is in fact such a thing as too much garlic, at least in this recipe. Because the dominant flavor of this dish is not garlic. Garlic is merely an accent. Learn to stack the hard way. At this point, you can start preheating the wok.